You know, I've seen a lot of war films, and many of them are exciting or moving or dramatic or artistically effective. And a few of them actually reach you at an emotional level and not just at the action level. I was amazed the first time I saw Grave of the Fireflies to find that I was actually moved just about to tears by this film. You know, I think people who don't know what to expect are going to be very surprised by it. So this film has an emotional breadth to it, involving war and the kind of results of war and two victims of war, that is astonishing. I was trying to picture this as a live-action film because you would assume that a story of the firebombing of Kobe and the brother and sister who survive it and then who try to live in the aftermath, would be made for a live-action treatment. You would never think of this as an anime subject. And it occurred to me that if you did make it live action, it would probably look something like, or could look something like, an Italian neorealist film, maybe something by De Sica or Rossellini, somebody like that. And it'd be kind of bogged down in realism. Maybe it would be a very good film. I'm not saying it wouldn't be a good film, but it wouldn't be as pure or as abstract or as kind of crystallized as the anime approach allows. You would have real streets and real bombs and real people and real blood and real hunger, and you'd have lots of shots of a little girl who was starving. And here you have a little girl who's starving, but in a way what you have is the idea of a little girl who's starving. And then that's what moves you. If you had to see a real little actress of 5 or 6 years old baking mud pies or eating stones, the very fact of that image might get in the way of the meaning of that image. And so in a way, the fact that the story is realistic and the artistic approach is stylistic works by not having two levels of realism clash against each other. It's almost like it's purer, it's more pure, that the stylized characters have this extremely unstylized and very harrowing experience.
Now Dad's gone too. He's dead too. Dad.
Despite the fact that there are shots of bombers overhead, which seem to come in inhuman, implacable waves, there's not a lot of talk about the Americans or why are they doing this to us. And I think there are a couple of reasons for that. I met a group of Asian filmmakers from Vietnam at the Hawaii Film Festival about 15 years ago who had come over with a group of their films about the war, showing the other side of that war. And I noticed that in none of their films did they ever mention the United States. It was just the enemy. And I asked them about that, and they said, well, we've had so many enemies over the years. We've had China, we've had the French, the Americans, who knows who's next. The way we look at it is, you know, we are we, and then anyone who comes to attack us is the enemy, but their identity is not so important as the fact that they are our enemy. I think maybe this movie is saying that firebombing is not a very precise way of going after the enemy. It's a way to destroy morale, it's a way to break down a nation's will to resist, but at the same time, are we really thinking about people like this little brother and his even smaller sister when we drop those bombs? Or are we managing to objectify the Japanese as an evil race who deserve to have this happen to them? Well, of course, every time you look at a cartoon of any sort, it's unrealistic. No bunny looks like Bugs. No mouse looks like Mickey. And the people in the world that we live in don't look like the people in Grave of the Fireflies. In addition to that, Japanese anime in particular likes to use extremely plastic faces, very big eyes. And that's a style, and I think you have to get accustomed to it as a style. I think it would be wrong to say, well, I don't like this movie because the eyes are too big. Actually, the reason that eyes are so big in Japanese anime, as I understand it, is because they were influenced by early Disney pictures. And they felt that by exaggerating the features, they were making the characters more saturated with personality. It is true that one of the things that Disney and the early American animators discovered was that in order to sell personality with cartoon characters, you had to find attributes that they had and exaggerate them. You didn't want to just make cartoons of people who looked like regular people. In the case of Grave of the Fireflies, and any anime film as far as I'm concerned, what happens is the emotion is underneath the art. It doesn't matter that these don't look exactly like people that we see in the real world, because we quickly begin to read them as the people in the real world of this movie, as the characters in this movie. And we identify with them and with their predicament and with their personalities and with what they try to do. What I find in a lot of these Japanese films is a watercolor look, a painterly look. If you look at Totoro, for example, it looks like it was done with watercolors, a lot of it, especially the backgrounds. And there's a softness and a charm, a warmth to that, as opposed to the harder-edged outlines and colors of a lot of American animation. I like that. I like the fact that it looks more painterly. I think that in the very early days of animated cartoons, they were very much influenced by comic strips. And a cartoon would look like an animated comic strip from the Sunday newspaper. And that in fact it could also look like just a drawing from life. And a lot of short animated films do that, but if you're looking for features that do that, usually you have to look to Japan. Well, you know, in Japanese poetry, they'll use a pillow word. It will be a word or a short phrase that essentially just represents almost a musical beat between what went before and what comes after. And then if you look at the films of a great director like Ozu, who I think is one of the finest movie directors who has ever lived, you will find what I call pillow shots. He will be telling a story, and the story will take place in a house, and it might involve the father and his daughter and some people who come to visit, or the neighbors next door, or maybe a woman the father is about to marry, or maybe a man that the daughter is about to marry. And they'll talk, and there'll be some interaction, and then a certain phrase will end, and he'll cut outside, and he'll show something. Not necessarily a beautiful shot. It might be just a shot of the corner of a building and then some railroad tracks in the background, or a window and a roof line and some electrical wires, or a tree and a street, and he'll hold on that, and then he'll come back inside. He's using it as punctuation. It's a form of silence. It's a form of saying, let's not rush headlong from each scene to the next scene, but let's say, okay, this has happened, and now we'll kind of look out the window and think about it, and now this has happened, and now we'll take another moment. And that use of the pillow shot gives his films a kind of thoughtfulness and pacing that becomes really important to you after a while. You begin to appreciate it. In Grave of the Fireflies, there were also shots like that. There are moments when not much happens, and that to me is one of the key elements of all Japanese animation, is that they are willing to go to all that trouble to animate little inconsequential moments. Somebody just doing a little behavior, somebody adjusting their clothing, or just turning around and then turning back. And so the fact that they give themselves the luxury of putting in extra stuff, additional stuff. The Fireflies, for example, that in Grave of the Fireflies, that they use to illuminate their cave, are very beautiful, and they are given a little moment of silence and contemplation and mystery that kind of sets up the scene the next day when the young girl buries the fireflies just in a way as she hopes that her mother has been buried. And all the details involving the little pieces of candy and the can that they come in, and the various, little children are built very close to the ground, so she picks up pebbles and she uses mud and things, and she looks at flowers and stuff, and it's all very detailed in a way that has nothing really to do with the fact that her brother is out looking for food and she's starving to death and the bombs are falling and things like that. It has to do with the daily texture. You know, occasionally people will look at some anime and say it's not technically as sophisticated or advanced as American animation. American animation attempts to reproduce motion at 24 frames a second to look more or less like objects and animals and people really do look like when they're moving. And some Japanese anime uses fewer frames per second in order to economize on how many frames they have to draw. And so the animation is not as fluid, not as realistic, and the backgrounds maybe are not as detailed, and the figures are not as fully articulated, and maybe only parts of the image are moving at any given time. I think, to me, if the story is working and if the characters are involving and if the artistic imagination is there and if the eye is there, then those other things simply become stylistic details that become less important as the film goes on. You know, you're not looking at the whole film just on the basis of some abstract idea of technical excellence. You're looking at it in terms of its excellence as art, and art doesn't always depend upon how many frames a second or whether this was done or whether that was done. It depends upon how it makes you feel.
Time for bed, okay?